So I've been playing a lot of mobile games recently, because trying to get deep into 100-hour Rockstar games isn't always easy when you've got a 2-year-old wanting to watch Hey Duggee and a preteen wanting to watch Hollyoaks, which often leaves those precious free minutes to more important things like socialising, which currently makes the Switch and mobile gaming really appealing to me right now. And I recently replayed a puzzle game called The Room on the Switch, originally released on phones in 2012. And while playing, I always tend to be on the lookout for how games are animated, and I noticed how still it all was, and it got me thinking, are there benefits to the absence of animation? If we look at The Room, for example, we have a box on a table that must be unlocked by checking various compartments which will reveal hidden buttons and gadgets. On the Switch version, you have a minor clue in your cursor as to what can be investigated, but in the mobile version you just have to tap around. Notice how there's no real movement. Nothing is distracting you from just intense staring. Now, imagine if all these things were moving in some manner, in a bid to appear interesting or visually stimulating. You'd very easily be put off in being able to identify what was important to investigate. What if a moving part was a red herring? What if something important was static amongst all the movement? It'd go unnoticed, portray poor conveyance, and would result in bad game design. The benefit of little to no animation I would almost certainly attribute to puzzle games. If there was ever a genre of games that requires concentration without distraction, it'd be the one where pensive scrutiny is paramount. But not every puzzle game is a box on a table. Let's check out a few more examples of puzzle games with little or no animation, and see if we can draw together some ideas in this topic. A particular favourite puzzle game of mine is The Witness. In my opinion, a masterpiece, adapting one simple idea into many complex ones, where you literally draw one line to connect two nodes, which results in doors opening, machines working, more puzzles, and many more things. Each area of the game's island contains its own puzzle motif. Some are logic, some are visual, some are even audio. But you'll never see anything move, unless it's something you moved. Actually, I tell a lie, trees sway at an incredibly slow pace. But again, like The Room, this is important so as not to distract you in any way into thinking that what you're concentrating on isn't correct. Everything needs to be on the table in the same way. If any of these plants swayed in the wind, would you be more likely to not bother checking? And if they did sway in the wind, then these trees would also need to sway in the wind, but then that would be detrimental to the puzzle, which requires careful study on the static shadows. On the flip side, to make things harder later, you do have movement. The very few pieces of animation is deliberately distracting, precisely for that reason. In Portal, hardly anything moves. Anything that does move is purely fixed to the item and the puzzle. For instance, the plasma shooters. The ball moves around the room and you can see where it bounces off the walls, but you'd never look into this in any more detail than that. There's no other clues from how it shimmers or moves to aid in completion of the puzzle. One exception might be when it begins to fade, which you'll then know that it will soon disappear. Nothing animated is detrimental to the puzzle design. The brilliant, clever and funny Donut County uses sparing animation, only to highlight certain aspects that might be important, such as things catching fire or your hole filling with water. Various characters will watch your hole, but this is just an aesthetic touch rather than anything to pay attention to, reinforced by the fact you can still gobble them up. But that's not to say that Donut County would be any worse because it looked more lively. Indeed, flowing water or swaying foliage wouldn't be any more distracting because the game is essentially about capturing objects. If the game was about looking for clues in moving objects, then it might well be distracting, so it's all relative to the game design. So how about non-puzzle games that have little animation, or puzzle games that do have animation? For instance, Flashback for the Amiga has very little background animation, and anything that tends to move in the game must be treated with priority, but I'd not say it was anything you had to concentrate on. Instead, it gives you a heightened sense of awareness. The HD remake, while suffering from various other pieces of game design, still retains this stillness, so it's not necessarily because Flashback is an older game either. Celeste, I guess you could call a puzzle platformer, but there's plenty of small animated flourishes in the environment that keeps it from looking static, and yet it's still not that distracting. You can still concentrate on focusing those achy thumbs of yours. And of course there's Braid and Fez, both puzzle platformers that have some gentle movement here and there. So I guess that brings me to ask, how distracting does animation need to be for it to break your concentration? Should puzzle games always have little to no animation for this reason? Monument Valley wouldn't be any less appealing if there was less movement from the crow guys that look up as you go near them. I Love Hue would still be addictive if there was any amount of animation. Her Story kind of requires you to look at video clips. Lara Croft Go is a lovely looking and cleverly built puzzle action game, but it's not completely static and lifeless. You've small plants and pieces of fabric that sway in the breeze, particles of dust that catch sunbeams, enemies can have idle animations, fire will burn away. While it's still a head-scratching puzzle game, there's a gentle ambient movement which doesn't distract you from your thoughts. And how can we forget point-and-click classics like Day of the Tentacle and Broken Sword? All practically static backgrounds, but movement in various places which signify potential investigation. The animation isn't over the top, but helps bring you into the game, helping to capture that immersiveness, helping you to understand the characters, environments, and ultimately the puzzles. So perhaps there's a limit on how fast little pieces of animation should move. Games like Cuphead have insane amounts of animation. There's lots to concentrate on. You could argue it's detrimental to the design, but then the design is to be challenging. Part of the design is keeping all these bits of moving information in your head at once, recognising which things move at what point so you can avoid damage and shoot the boss. Is this not a puzzle itself? Even beautiful animated games like Professor Layton have calm, still bits for the actual puzzle solving. Action games like Mega Man 11 have beautifully detailed backgrounds which remain mostly static and dark, and this is to promote clarity in stage design, so it's clear where Mega Man is, where enemies are, where stage platforms begin and end, and it's basically an attempt by the designers to allow accessibility and aid in concentration. You'll notice tougher areas like this Wall of Fire and Torchman stage is notably harder, not just because it's an intense chase, but because there's embers and smoke rising from the bottom of the screen, and there's moving fire everywhere too. It all comes across as much more hectic, and thus more challenging. I guess we could compare animated and static puzzle video games to the likes of doing a Sudoku in a quiet library, by a beach with a gentle wave, or in a busy rush hour bus. One is purely focused on you being able to think clearly, one is focused on keeping you mellowed and relaxed, and one is hectic enough to force you to concentrate even harder. The more concentration that's required, the more likely it is that a calm environment is going to help your mind focus effectively. Perhaps there's an extra layer of challenge which is added when varying types of animation are present in your puzzle game. In this regard, going back to our initial question of are there benefits to the absence of animation, I'd say absolutely. Giving your player the best experience in a puzzle game certainly seems to require vastly reduced movement to aid in concentration. And I'd extend this to more puzzling parts in non-puzzle games as well. So, you can go library mode with no movement, beach mode with a relaxing and ambient vibe, or rush hour mode with hectic and overwhelming motion to perhaps add that layer of challenge. And hey, it doesn't need to be one thing for the whole game. Maybe you can have a bit of everything to give the whole game a bit of texture. Do check out all these games too, by the way, because in this crazy hectic world, it does your soul wonders just to mellow and exercise your mind. Thanks for watching. Let me know what your favourite puzzle game is below, and whether you think animation helps or hinders the game design. Consider supporting the show on Patreon like these amazing people, and you'll get a bunch of goodies for doing so, and you'll help me be one step closer to bringing you a new episode sooner. Love you, bye.